There are moments in history when one man's will reshapes the fate of nations. When faith meets discipline and purpose conquers fear, destiny itself bows. This is the story of an English king who rose from the shores of Normandy to rule an empire through courage, wisdom, and unwavering belief in his purpose. He wasn't born with power, he built it through patience, strategy, and a heart that refused to surrender. His name became a symbol of strength, his rule a lesson in leadership, and his life a testament that true greatness is earned through faith and struggle, not inherited through birth. Imagine standing on the edge of destiny, one man, one army, facing the unknown across a stormy sea. Every doubt screams that failure is certain, but his heart whispers one truth: you were made for this. That's what William believed when he crossed the channel to claim what he saw as his divine right. His courage wasn't blind. It was built on preparation, vision, and the unshakable conviction that a person guided by purpose cannot be stopped. The fire that burned in him that day still burns in the hearts of those who refuse to let fear dictate their fate. William's story began not with a sword in hand, but with a promise whispered across kingdoms. When King Edward of England gave his word that William would inherit the throne, it lit a flame in the young duke's heart. That promise became the seed of destiny, a seed that grew through storms, betrayal, and war. William was not born into peace. He was born into a world where words could build kingdoms or destroy them. Yet he chose to believe in that promise, not out of greed, but because he believed in justice, that when a word is given, it carries weight. As years passed, William learned that promises are fragile things. People break them when fear or power blinds them. When he heard that Harold had taken the throne after Edward's death, his heart did not fill with hatred. Instead, it burned with purpose. He saw this not as the end of his dream, but as a divine test, a call to rise and prove that his destiny would not be stolen by betrayal. The moment of deception became the beginning of transformation, as he decided that his fate would be shaped not by others' words, but by his own actions. William spent sleepless nights reflecting, praying, and preparing. He looked at the stars over Normandy and thought of the weight of the throne, not for its crown, but for its responsibility. He knew that a true king is not one who sits on gold, but one who upholds justice. The betrayal only sharpened his sense of right and wrong. His heart did not seek revenge. It sought restoration of truth. It was in those silent nights that William transformed from a duke into a leader who understood that destiny is not handed to you. It is earned through sacrifice. The news of Harold's coronation reached him like thunder across the sea. Some of his men were furious, urging him to take immediate revenge. But William silenced them with calm authority. He said, "We will not fight because of anger. We will fight because of truth." His restraint astonished even his closest knights. While others shouted for war, William sought counsel, gathered wisdom, and strengthened his army through faith and unity. This patience became his armor, stronger than any shield. He began to gather allies across the lands, speaking not of vengeance, but of justice. Nobles and soldiers saw something divine in his composure, a leader who would not let emotion cloud his vision. Slowly, his camp grew, not just with men, but with believers. They believed in the righteousness of their cause, in the destiny of a man who carried himself with dignity even in betrayal. That's what makes true kings. They attract loyalty through purpose, not fear. As he planned his campaign, William faced every kind of obstacle, doubts, shortages, resistance. But each challenge refined him further. He learned that patience is not weakness, it is power under control. While the English celebrated their new king, William quietly forged his destiny in silence. He trained his soldiers, improved his ships, and studied every detail of the English coast. The one who acts with patience prepares a victory no haste can destroy. Many questioned his ambition. Some even called him foolish to challenge an entire kingdom across the sea. But William did not see impossibility. He saw opportunity wrapped in difficulty. He would often tell his commanders, the harder the path, the greater the reward. That mindset infected his army with unshakable determination. They stopped seeing danger, they started seeing destiny. There were moments of doubt even within his heart. He was human, after all. Yet every time fear whispered to him, he reminded himself of the promise, and that a word once spoken with honor should not fade into silence. The broken oath became his fire. It purified his will. He trained not only his soldiers but his soul, knowing that the true battle begins within. Days turned into months, and his preparation became legendary. His armory filled with weapons, his ports with ships, his men with courage. But above all, his heart filled with conviction that his cause was right. He did not chase the throne for luxury or pride. He pursued it to fulfill what was promised, to prove that truth is stronger than treachery. When the final day came for him to set sail, William stood at the shores of Normandy, his armor shining in the dawn. The winds carried his flag as if the heavens themselves supported his cause. He looked upon the waves and whispered, "The word once given shall be fulfilled." In that moment, he was not just a duke. He was destiny walking in armor. His story had begun not with war, but with faith in the power of truth. William's childhood was not surrounded by comfort or safety. It was born in chaos. As the illegitimate son of Robert, Duke of Normandy, he faced judgment and mockery from nobles who looked down upon him. From his earliest days, he was forced to understand that respect is not given, it must be earned. Before he even held a sword, he was fighting battles of survival, loyalty, and trust. He learned to watch people's eyes, to sense deceit, to move wisely in a world where enemies often smiled before they struck. His youth was not gentle, but it was shaping him into a man who could one day carry the weight of a crown. When his father died, William was still a child, yet suddenly the ruler of a land where powerful men refused to follow a boy. Normandy fell into disorder. Rebellions rose like waves, castles burned, and assassins moved through the night. William lived each day not knowing who was friend or foe. Several times he narrowly escaped death, but instead of breaking, those moments built something inside him, a spirit that refused to yield. Hardship became his teacher, and fear became his training ground. Each betrayal taught him another lesson about strength. When his guardians were murdered, when his protectors turned traitor, he learned that courage is not the absence of fear, but the will to act in spite of it. The more danger surrounded him, the sharper his mind became. He started understanding that leadership is not just about commanding others, it is about mastering oneself first. The young Duke learned to control his emotions, to think clearly even when the world was collapsing around him. There were nights when he had to hide in peasant homes, disguised and uncertain of tomorrow. Those nights he stared into the darkness and whispered prayers for protection, for wisdom, for endurance. He realized that the Creator does not grant strength instantly. He shapes it through trials. Every hardship was molding his character, preparing him for the day he would stand before armies and kings. The child who fled from assassins would one day command thousands. As he grew older, William began to take control of his destiny. Instead of running from danger, he started facing it. When rebellions broke out again, he personally led his small forces to restore order. His bravery inspired loyalty in those who doubted him. Soldiers who once questioned his right to rule began to see him not as a child but as a leader born from the fire of survival. Each victory built his confidence, and each struggle refined his leadership. Even in victory, he remained humble. He didn't boast or flaunt his power. He knew his position was still fragile, and arrogance could destroy what patience had built. Instead, he focused on unity. He rewarded loyalty, forgave those who surrendered, and strengthened his alliances. This wisdom at such a young age made people realize there was something different about him, a maturity carved by pain, not privilege. With time, William began to understand the nature of authority. It was not about ruling through fear, but about earning trust through fairness. He developed a habit of listening before deciding, of thinking before reacting. This was rare among rulers, and it made him respected even by his enemies. The very chaos that threatened to destroy him became his greatest mentor, teaching him how to balance power with patience. Every scar of his youth carried a message. Every loss taught him something about endurance. Every betrayal showed him who he could trust. Slowly, he became unshakable. He learned to move through crisis as if it were normal, to think clearly when others panicked, to keep faith when others lost hope. This calm strength would later become the foundation of his rule, for no kingdom can stand without a leader who stands firm in storms. When the nobles of Normandy finally recognized his control, it wasn't because he inherited authority. It was because he earned it. He had survived assassins, crushed rebellions, and turned enemies into allies. The boy they once mocked had become the man they feared and followed. That transformation was not sudden. It was forged over years of hardship, struggle, and growth. By the time William became a man, he was already a legend in the making, not because of birthright, but because of endurance. His life had taught him that greatness is not gifted to those who are comfortable. It is born from those who walk through darkness and refuse to stop moving forward. The storms of his youth had done more than test him. They had prepared him for an empire. When the news reached William that Harold had been crowned King of England, the world around him fell silent. The promise he had held onto for years, the word of King Edward that he would be heir, had been broken. For a moment, anger stirred inside him, a fire that could have consumed his reason. But William was not a man of impulse, he was a man of vision. He turned away from wrath and chose reflection. He knew that reacting in fury would make him no different from those who acted in deceit. He believed that true victory was not won by emotion, but by faith and discipline. In the quiet of his chambers, William prayed. He sought clarity, not revenge. He asked for strength to stand for justice without falling into hatred. That moment defined him more than any battle ever would. He understood that power gained through patience is far more lasting than power gained through rage. His advisors saw the calmness in his face and knew that something greater was at work within him. A resolve built on principle, not pride. When William finally decided to call his people to arms, he did not do so with promises of gold or plunder. He stood before them with a vision, one that reached beyond the battlefield. He spoke of honor, of keeping one's word, of restoring justice where deceit had taken hold. His voice carried conviction, and his words touched the hearts of men who had followed him since his youth. They saw in him not a duke hungry for power, but a man chosen by destiny to correct a wrong. His speeches were not filled with rage, they were filled with purpose. And that purpose united people more strongly than any reward could. As word spread across Normandy, knights, archers, and soldiers began to gather under William's banner. Some came from distant lands, drawn not by wealth, but by his unshakable confidence. He treated each man with respect, no matter his rank. He would walk among them, asking about their families, their beliefs, their readiness. His humility made him approachable, his faith made him trustworthy, and his leadership made him unforgettable. That was the secret of his growing power. He led hearts, not just armies. William's charisma became his greatest weapon. He didn't just command loyalty, he inspired it. When he spoke of the coming war, he called it not a conquest, but a mission. We fight, he would say, not for greed, but for the promise that truth will prevail. These words burned in the hearts of his soldiers. They trained harder, prayed together, and prepared for the day they would set sail to reclaim what was rightfully promised. His army was not merely an army of men. It became an army of believers in justice. Every night, before training ended, William would gather his men and remind them of the greater meaning behind their struggle. He would tell them the one who fights for a just cause never fights alone. These moments gave his men strength far beyond physical endurance. They began to see themselves as part of something sacred. Even those who once fought for pay now fought for principle. The unity that grew among them was not forced. It was born from shared belief. In the weeks that followed, the sound of training filled the fields of Normandy. The clang of swords, the clash of shields, and the rhythm of marching boots became the music of preparation. William oversaw everything, from the building of ships to the making of weapons. He was not a ruler who sat apart from his men. He worked beside them, showing by action what words alone could not teach. His presence reminded everyone that greatness begins with example. As his army grew, so did his influence. Nobles who once hesitated began offering their support, not out of fear, but out of admiration. They saw in William a man guided by faith, not fury. His cause gave them courage. They realized that to stand with him was to stand with truth itself. YVILL Vage, HivGEVISITED visited. Every council he addressed carried the same message, unity through justice. His leadership turned scattered hearts into a single force of destiny. William's preparations were not just physical, they were deeply spiritual. Before each major step, he sought counsel and prayer. He wanted his campaign to be rooted in righteousness, not arrogance. He knew that victories gained by arrogance crumble, but those built on justice endure. His faith grounded him, keeping him humble even as his power expanded. That humility became his protection from pride, the silent destroyer of kings. When his soldiers saw him kneel in prayer before training, they understood that their leader did not rely solely on strategy or strength. He relied on something higher. That image, a powerful duke humbling himself before the Creator, inspired even the proudest warriors to seek sincerity in their own hearts. It reminded them that faith is not weakness. It is the source of courage that never fades. William also knew that vision must be seen, not only spoken. He began constructing great ships, over 700 in total, to carry his army across the sea. To his men, those ships became symbols of purpose. Every plank hammered, every sail raised, reminded them that they were building not just vessels, but destiny itself. The sight of that growing fleet filled their hearts with determination. The once impossible mission now felt inevitable. As the preparations neared completion, William gathered his men one final time before the campaign. Standing before the vast army, with the sea behind him and banners flying high, he raised his sword and declared, "We are not the seekers of war. We are the keepers of justice. The world will remember that we stood for what was right." The roar that followed shook the air. It was not just the cry of soldiers, it was the awakening of purpose. In that moment, William had not merely united men, He had united their souls. Many around him expected immediate retaliation. They wanted war, they wanted to strike before Harold could strengthen his position, but William refused haste. He told his men, "If we fight without order, we lose before the battle begins." That single statement carried wisdom far beyond warfare. He was teaching his people that self-control is the first form of power. His calmness in betrayal inspired confidence among those who served him. They saw in him a man whose leadership came not from emotion but from inner strength. He began preparing for what was to come, not out of vengeance but with a sense of divine timing. He sent envoys across Europe, building alliances, seeking support from the Pope, and ensuring that his cause would be seen as just. Every decision he made was deliberate. He did not rush, for he understood that destiny unfolds only when patience meets preparation. His faith in this truth made him unshakable, even as his enemies celebrated. The day finally arrived when William's army was ready to cross the sea. The ships that had taken months to build now lined the coast of Normandy like silent giants awaiting their call. The wind was fierce, the sky uncertain, but William's heart was steady. He stood on the shore, watching his men load supplies and mount their horses. Each wave that crashed against the shore seemed to test his patience, but his resolve never wavered. He knew that every great purpose must first pass through a storm before reaching its promise. And this storm, he sensed, would be the test of their faith and their unity. As the fleet began to sail, the sea turned restless. Dark clouds gathered overhead and waves rose higher, tossing the ships like leaves in the wind. Men held tightly to the ropes, praying under their breath, while thunder rolled across the horizon. It was as though the heavens themselves wanted to know if William's will was strong enough to endure. Some captains hesitated, fearing they would not survive the crossing. But William, standing tall at the front of his ship, refused to retreat. His courage became their anchor. When the waves struck hard, William raised his voice over the roaring wind. "Hold fast," he shouted. "The sea cannot drown those whose hearts are steady." His words carried across the storm, reaching trembling men who found new strength in his conviction. They looked at their leader, soaked, fearless, unshaken, and realized that if he would not yield, neither should they. That moment transformed fear into determination. Leadership in its purest form is not found in ease. It is revealed in the storm. Hours turned into an endless night of wind and rain. Ships were separated, supplies lost, and men exhausted. Yet, even as the storm raged, William stood awake, guiding his ship, shouting orders, and offering hope. His endurance reminded everyone that faith without perseverance is hollow. He was not a man relying on chance. He was a man guided by purpose. And purpose, when rooted in belief, can withstand any wave. By morning, the storm had begun to calm. The sea grew quiet, but its violence had left its mark. Several ships were damaged, some gone entirely. Yet, remarkably, most of the fleet survived. When the sun rose, its light broke through the clouds, bathing the sea in gold. William gazed at the horizon, his face calm and thankful. He understood that this was not just survival, it was a message. The storm had not come to stop them, it had come to prove them. As the men repaired their ships and counted their blessings, William gathered them on the shore of a small island where they had taken refuge. "We have been tested," he said, "and we did not break. The sea tried to turn us back, but faith kept us moving forward. This is how destiny works, it asks. Are you ready to suffer for what you believe? And we have answered." His men, still weary, stood taller. They began to see the storm not as a curse, but as a sign that their mission carried meaning beyond conquest. When the fleet finally reached the coast of England, the soldiers who stepped onto the sand were not the same men who had left Normandy. They were tempered by the storm, strengthened by hardship, and united by faith. Each one had seen fear face to face and overcome it. That bond made them unstoppable. No enemy could scare men who had already conquered the fury of the sea. William looked at their faces and knew the storm had done more for their spirit than months of training ever could. That night, as they camped along the English shore, William walked among his men, thanking them for their courage. He saw them laughing, eating, repairing weapons, alive and grateful. The sound of waves crashing near by no longer brought fear, but peace. It reminded them of what they had survived. William realized that the sea had given them something priceless, belief in themselves. They were no longer just an army following a leader. They were a brotherhood forged by endurance. The next morning, William looked back toward the horizon where Normandy lay, now hidden beyond miles of sea. He thought of all the challenges still ahead, but he felt no hesitation. The hardest part, the test of faith and unity, had already been overcome. He had seen men face death and choose courage. That was victory before the battle even began. Every step from that moment forward carried the weight of that triumph. As his army prepared to march inland, William mounted his horse and looked once more at the waves behind him. "The storm could not stop us," he said quietly. "That means nothing else will." The men who heard those words felt a surge of pride. They had seen their leader face the fury of nature itself and emerge unbroken. The storm had not destroyed them, it had crowned them with strength. And so, with sails behind and destiny ahead, William led his army forward, ready for the battles to come. William spent long nights alone, studying maps of England, tracing routes, calculating supplies, and visualizing every movement of his army. He was not rushing toward war. He was designing victory. It was in those hours of solitude that his true strength revealed itself. His ability to think deeply, to act wisely, and to remain steady while others panicked. This silence of his planning room was more powerful than the noise of 1,000 warriors shouting for battle. There were men who questioned his methods, calling him too cautious, too calculating, but William knew that emotion blinds strategy. He had seen too many men lose everything because they acted without thought. His patience wasn't weakness, it was wisdom. He told his commanders, "Let them believe I am still. The lion that waits strikes once and never misses." That line became the heartbeat of his army. They began to understand that the strength of their leader lay not in his temper, but in his control. As preparations continued, William focused on keeping his people united. He addressed them not with promises of wealth or revenge, but with reminders of justice. "We fight," he said, "because truth was broken, and when truth is broken, we must stand not with anger, but with honor." Those words turned his army into a brotherhood of purpose. They were no longer fighting for a man, they were fighting for a cause, and a cause born from justice can move mountains. William's calmness even disarmed his rivals. His refusal to act in haste confused them. While Harold's court celebrated and grew complacent, William was already building the foundation of his campaign. His quiet patience was more dangerous than open aggression. It allowed him to prepare unseen, to turn faith into a weapon and strategy into destiny. His stillness was not inactivity. It was precision waiting for the perfect moment. Through all of this, William's faith remained constant. He often reminded his men that victory does not come from numbers or strength, but from discipline and belief in the righteousness of one's cause. That conviction gave him an inner peace that others could not understand. While Harold wore the crown, William carried conviction, and conviction lasts longer than any throne. As he stood one night on the shores of Normandy, watching the sea reflect the moonlight, William whispered to himself that truth will always find its way back. He was not seeking power for glory. He was seeking fulfillment of what was rightfully his, in a manner that honored patience and justice. The world saw a man waiting, but destiny saw a man preparing. And in that preparation, William became the embodiment of faith-driven strength, calm, focused, and unstoppable. When William's army finally marched inland, the reality of conquest came into full view. The English forces were not unprepared. They were fierce, organized, and loyal to their king, Harold Godwinson. The land that stretched before William's troops was foreign and uncertain, yet every man knew that what awaited them was the defining moment of their lives. The march toward Hastings was long and tense. Each step echoed the sound of destiny drawing closer. The soldiers whispered prayers as they moved, their armor glinting in the pale morning sun, their hearts steady with the belief that victory belonged to those who refused to turn back. The air carried the weight of two worlds about to collide, one defending its crown, the other fighting for a divine purpose. William was not blinded by ambition. He believed his claim was righteous, that he had been chosen by fate to lead. His leadership was not built on arrogance but on conviction. He reminded his men that this was not just a battle of swords, it was a battle of faith, of courage, of discipline. Those who fight for wealth may tire, but those who fight for purpose never yield. And that belief gave his army a quiet power that no fear could erase. As they camped before the great battle, William moved through his ranks, speaking to his men personally. He called them by name, listened to their fears, and reminded them of their journey. "You have crossed the sea," he said. "You have faced storms and survived. You are not here by chance, you are here by choice." His words reignited their spirits. He was not just a commander. He was a leader who shared their burden. His faith in them became their faith in themselves. Every soldier began to stand a little taller, sharpening his sword not out of fear, but out of readiness. The night before the battle was silent and heavy. Fires flickered across the camp, casting long shadows on the ground. Some soldiers prayed, others sat quietly polishing their armor, and a few stared at the stars, thinking of home. William remained awake, watching the horizon. He knew dawn would bring chaos, blood, and cries of victory or defeat. But deep in his heart, he felt a strange calm. He believed that every struggle before this moment had been preparing them for tomorrow. The storm, the hunger, the exhaustion, it had all been training for this final test. When dawn broke, a mist covered the hills of Hastings. The battlefield was painted in pale gold as the sun rose. The English army took their position on higher ground, forming a wall of shields, a formation nearly impossible to break. William studied them carefully. He knew charging blindly would mean disaster. His mind was sharp and calculating. "Patience," he told his captains. "Let them think we are weak before we strike." Strategy, he knew, often wins where strength cannot. And so began one of the most legendary battles in history. The first clash was deafening. Arrows whistled through the air as Norman archers released their volleys. The English shield wall held strong, their defense impenetrable. William's cavalry charged, only to be pushed back by a wall of steel and courage. For a moment it seemed as though the English might prevail. Rumors spread that William had been slain, and panic rippled through his ranks. But then, through the chaos, William tore off his helmet, raised it high, and shouted, "I am alive. God is with us." His voice cut through the noise like thunder. That moment reignited his army, courage returned, and fear vanished. Realizing brute force would not win the day, William devised a brilliant tactic. He ordered a false retreat. His men pretended to flee, drawing the English soldiers downhill, breaking their perfect formation. Then, at his signal, the Normans turned and attacked with renewed fury. The English, scattered and exposed, were caught off guard. What had once been an unbreakable wall became chaos. It was the turning point, the moment strategy defeated strength. The battlefield roared with the sound of victory beginning to take shape. As the sun began to set, the ground was covered in the dust and cries of battle. The English King Harold was struck down, and with his fall, the tide turned completely. William's army pressed forward relentlessly, their faith stronger than their fatigue. Every man fought not just for conquest, but for the destiny they had been promised. William himself fought in the thick of battle, his sword rising and falling with purpose. He was no distant ruler. He was a warrior among warriors. When the battle finally ended, silence fell across Hastings. The smoke cleared, and William stood among the remnants of war, exhausted but victorious. He looked to the heavens and whispered a prayer of gratitude. He did not celebrate with pride, but with humility. He knew that power earned through blood carried a heavy responsibility. This victory was not the end. It was the beginning of a new chapter that demanded wisdom, justice, and faith. That night, as the fires burned and the cries of the wounded faded, William walked alone through the battlefield. The stars above seemed brighter than ever, as if bearing witness to what had been written in history. He realized that every sacrifice, every hardship, every prayer had led to this moment. The war had given him not just a crown, but a purpose to rule with strength and fairness, to bring unity where there had been division, and to remember always that victory comes not from power alone, but from unwavering faith in what is right. When William finally secured victory at Hastings, the weight of his triumph did not rest lightly upon his shoulders. Conquering a kingdom was one thing, ruling it justly was another. The land he had entered as an invader was now his to govern, yet it was filled with people who viewed him as an outsider. Every castle, every village, every field he looked upon had once belonged to someone loyal to another king. The challenge before him was immense: to transform conquest into unity, to turn fear into trust. His vision was clear. He did not want to be remembered as a tyrant who crushed a nation, but as a ruler who rebuilt it with wisdom and justice. In the early days of his reign, William faced the storms of rebellion. The English nobles, proud and fiercely independent, were not ready to bow to a foreign ruler. They saw his rule as a shadow over their freedom, but William did not react with reckless cruelty. Instead, he studied his enemies with patience, understanding that true strength lies not in destroying opposition, but in outsmarting it. He moved with a strategist's mind, decisive when necessary, merciful when it earned loyalty. His goal was not to rule through fear, but through respect, knowing that fear breeds hatred while justice breeds stability. He began rebuilding his new kingdom from the ground up, establishing order where chaos once ruled. Castles rose not just as symbols of might, but as fortresses of governance and security. Roads were repaired, trade routes reopened, and systems of law refined. William understood that people crave stability more than anything else. When they saw order replacing disorder, they began to see him not as a conqueror, but as a king chosen by destiny. His faith guided him, reminding him that leadership is a trust, not a privilege. Every decision he made carried the weight of accountability, not just to his people, but to his Creator. To strengthen his rule, William introduced a system that changed England forever: the redistribution of land. He rewarded his most loyal knights and generals with estates, ensuring their allegiance, but he did so with fairness and structure. Each grant came with responsibility, the duty to protect, to administer justice, and to ensure peace. This new system, though born of conquest, laid the foundation for a stronger and more disciplined nation. It was not perfect, but it was a beginning. William was building not only an empire, but a legacy of organization and foresight. Still, rebellion flared across parts of England, especially in the north. Entire regions resisted his authority, refusing to accept foreign rule. William's patience was tested to its limits. He tried negotiation, offering peace and mercy, but when defiance persisted, he responded with strength. The campaigns he led against the rebels were fierce and decisive. He crushed opposition swiftly, ensuring that his rule would not be undermined by constant revolt. Though his actions were harsh, they brought stability. He learned that mercy without strength invites chaos, and strength without mercy leads to ruin. He balanced both with remarkable precision. Over time, the English people began to see the wisdom behind his governance. They noticed how his administration brought discipline, how his justice reached both noble and peasant alike. He began blending the Norman and Anglo-Saxon traditions, creating a kingdom stronger than either culture could have built alone. The language evolved, the laws matured, and a new identity began to form, not purely Norman, not purely English, but something united and enduring. William had not only conquered a land, he had begun to shape a nation. He commissioned one of his most ambitious projects, the Domesday Book. It was a record of every piece of land, every owner, every village, and every resource in his kingdom. No ruler before him had attempted such a task. It was a symbol of order and control, a declaration that every inch of his realm was known, accounted for, and protected. This document became one of the cornerstones of English governance, a reflection of William's visionary mind. His rule was not driven by impulse, but by careful calculation and an unyielding desire for progress. William's strength as a ruler did not come from his army alone. It came from his ability to adapt. He understood that a successful ruler must evolve with time, learning from both allies and adversaries. He built relationships with local leaders, rewarded loyalty, and allowed a measure of self-governance where it benefited peace. He never ruled with blind arrogance. He ruled with an understanding that authority without wisdom collapses. His adaptability turned once hostile regions into loyal parts of his empire, each bound together by the structure he had built. But beneath all the strategies and governance, William carried within him the spirit of the warrior who had crossed the sea. He never forgot his beginnings, the struggle, the storms, and the prayers whispered before battle. That memory kept him humble. He knew power was temporary, that one day his body would return to the earth, and only his deeds would remain. He wanted those deeds to speak not of greed, but of discipline, courage, and faith. That sense of purpose guided every decision, every law, every word he spoke to his council. As years passed, William's rule turned from conquest to legacy. The land he once fought to seize had become his to protect. The sword that once symbolized his ambition now symbolized his duty. He had proven that victory is not just about winning a war, it is about building after the war ends. His empire was no longer held together by fear, but by respect and structure. Through patience, vision, and unshakable faith, William transformed from a conqueror into a true king, one whose name would echo through centuries as the man who turned struggle into strength and ambition into destiny. Years passed after the Battle of Hastings, and William's rule grew firmer, but peace was never something handed to him easily. The throne of England came with endless trials, threats from within, unrest from without, and the constant weight of maintaining justice in a land still divided. Yet, what made William extraordinary was not his power to conquer, but his ability to endure the burden of leadership without losing his vision. Every morning he woke before sunrise, his mind clear and steady, for he knew a ruler must remain awake while others sleep. He could not afford to let complacency steal from him what discipline had built. His reign was a daily battle, not against swords and shields anymore, but against pride, rebellion, and corruption. He surrounded himself with wise advisors, men who would speak truth, not flattery. He valued honesty above comfort because he knew a king blinded by praise soon falls into ruin. Those who feared him respected him even more because of his sense of fairness. His court was not a place of indulgence, but of purpose. Decisions were made after reflection and prayer, not out of anger or impulse. The same man who once led cavalry into battle now led through words, vision, and justice. It was as though the warrior had transformed into a guardian, strong, disciplined, and unbending in principles. But leadership always demands sacrifice. The crown that once glittered with victory now felt heavier with responsibility. William missed the simplicity of the battlefield, where right and wrong were clear, and victory was earned by courage alone. Now, in the halls of power, deceit whispered in shadows. Envy festered among nobles who wanted more land, more influence, more gold. The enemy no longer carried a sword, it wore a smile. Yet William, shaped by hardship, had learned to see beyond appearances. He ruled not through trust in men, but through trust in God's wisdom and his own discernment. His patience became his shield, his faith his compass. He continued to strengthen his empire through reform. Roads expanded, trade increased, and governance improved. Villages flourished under systems that ensured fairness in taxation and justice. He often disguised himself to walk among the people, listening to their conversations, understanding their struggles. What he sought was not blind obedience but unity, a kingdom where peace did not come from fear but from fairness. His actions reminded his people that true leadership is service, not domination. He had conquered their land, but now he was winning their hearts. Even with peace spreading, danger was never far. Across the sea, threats from France began to rise. William's own homeland, Normandy, demanded his presence and protection. The irony of fate struck him deeply. He had left to conquer a foreign land, and now had to defend his own. He traveled back and forth, managing two great territories that stretched across nations. Each journey tested his endurance, each conflict his resolve. But wherever he went, discipline followed. His soldiers remained loyal, inspired by his courage and guided by his unwavering strength. During his campaigns in Normandy, William proved that his wisdom had only deepened with age. He no longer fought recklessly. Every battle he led was calculated, purposeful. He understood that strength is not shown in constant fighting, but in knowing when to act and when to wait. His presence alone on the battlefield was enough to inspire his men. The sight of the man who had once crossed the sea and changed history was enough to remind them that victory belonged to those who refused to quit. His name had become a symbol of endurance and divine favor. As he aged, William began to reflect more deeply on his journey. He often stood alone, watching the sunset from castle walls, remembering the stormy night before the Battle of Hastings, the fear, the faith, and the triumph. He realized that success is not a moment but a lifetime of perseverance. His victories had not been handed to him, they were earned through sweat, patience, and the belief that purpose outweighs pain. Those memories became lessons he wished to leave for future generations, that no empire stands unless its foundation is built on courage, discipline, and justice. But challenges continued to follow him. The more powerful his empire became, the more enemies it attracted. Betrayals emerged even among those he had once trusted. Yet William did not crumble under betrayal. He used it to strengthen his spirit. Every hardship refined him, every disappointment made him wiser. He knew that the path of greatness is never smooth. To lead is to endure pain with dignity, to stand tall even when surrounded by treachery. His steadfastness reminded everyone around him that true kings are tested not in moments of victory, but in the silence of trials. Despite his greatness, William remained grounded. He never forgot the days when he was a young duke fighting for survival. His humility set him apart from rulers who became prisoners of their own arrogance. Even in his final years, he continued to train to ride, to oversee his soldiers personally. He wanted his men to see that strength has no age, that leadership has no rest. His discipline inspired an entire generation of warriors, rulers, and thinkers who saw in him the living image of perseverance. As his life neared its twilight, William looked back on his empire, a land that had once been foreign and hostile, now united under his rule. He understood that his greatest achievement was not the crown or the castles, but the order and justice he had built. He had turned chaos into civilization, division into unity, struggle into legacy. His reign became a testament to what faith, strategy, and discipline can achieve when guided by purpose. And though time would one day take his throne and his body, his story remained carved in history, the journey of a man who proved that true kingship lies not in conquest, but in character. As the years went on, William's empire stood strong, but the peace he had built was always delicate, like a blade balanced on its edge. The weight of leadership began to press more heavily upon him. He had created order where chaos once reigned, yet the burden of maintaining it demanded more than strength. It demanded endurance. The early fire of conquest had cooled into the quiet responsibility of ruling wisely. Each sunrise brought new decisions that would affect thousands of lives, and every night brought moments of reflection, moments when William would question whether he had done enough, whether his rule had truly brought justice to all. The crown on his head was not a symbol of comfort, but a reminder of duty. Despite his power, William never allowed himself to grow complacent. He still trained, still inspected his soldiers, still sat in judgment when disputes arose. He believed that a ruler who grows distant from his people soon loses sight of the truth. He often rode through villages unannounced, watching how his laws were carried out, how his people lived, and how his officers served. He did not seek praise but honesty. His sharp eyes missed nothing. A lazy official, an unfair tax, or a hungry child would not go unnoticed. The people began to understand that their king was not a man who ruled from behind walls. He ruled with presence, purpose, and vigilance. The relationship between the Normans and the English was slowly changing. At first it was cold and filled with mistrust, but over time, as generations began to mix, a new sense of identity took shape. William's policies encouraged marriages between Norman nobles and English families, blending cultures that had once clashed. The language began to evolve, traditions merged, and a new society was born, one that reflected both strength and unity. This blending of two peoples was one of his greatest successes. and it would shape the identity of England for centuries to come. William's influence extended beyond politics. He encouraged education and administration, understanding that power is sustained not only by swords, but by knowledge. Monasteries and schools flourished under his rule. Records were kept, laws were written, and the idea of organized governance spread throughout his empire. The Domesday Book became a symbol of his vision, a record so thorough that no land, no cow, no plow went uncounted. It showed his people that nothing escaped the king's eyes, and that justice was not just a word but a system. His leadership was both feared and admired because it was rooted in discipline and truth. However, the peace he built came with constant challenges. Some of his own vassals grew restless, seeking more independence. Others whispered rebellion in secret, hoping to claim power for themselves. William's strength was tested once again, but this time it was not through open warfare. It was a battle of patience, wisdom, and authority. He had learned from experience that every empire has cracks, but it is the ruler's responsibility to seal them before they grow. His decisions became more measured, his punishments more precise. He ruled not with cruelty, but with absolute control. He reminded his followers that loyalty was not a choice. It was a duty bound by honor. In his private moments, William often reflected on how far he had come, from the uncertain Duke of Normandy to the King of England, from a man fighting for his right to lead to one ensuring peace across nations, yet he never let pride consume him. He knew that kingdoms fall when their rulers forget humility. He prayed regularly, seeking guidance to rule with justice and fairness. His heart carried gratitude for victory, for survival, and for the lessons taught by hardship. The same faith that had led him across the stormy sea still burned in his heart, reminding him that every success belongs to the will of the Almighty, not the strength of man alone. But even with faith, the trials of power never ceased. His sons began to quarrel over inheritance and future rule. He saw the same ambition in them that once drove him, but now he understood its danger. He tried to teach them that leadership is not about taking, but about serving, that a crown without discipline leads only to ruin. Yet he also knew that every generation must earn its own wisdom through struggle. It pained him to see division within his own blood, but he faced it with patience. He had built his empire through courage. Now he would protect it through guidance. The older he grew, the more William began to think about legacy. He wanted his empire to outlast him, to remain strong long after his final breath. He began shaping systems that would continue his work, appointing loyal administrators, ensuring the military remained organized, and solidifying alliances that would hold his realm together. He wanted to leave behind more than wealth or land. He wanted to leave behind an example that greatness is not in conquering others, but in conquering oneself. His story was no longer about battlefields, but about the strength to lead with justice when no one else dared to. As time went on, William's body began to show the signs of war and age. Old wounds ached, and fatigue visited more often. Yet his mind remained sharp, his will unbroken. Even when illness or pain struck, he refused to let it slow him down. His men still saw in him the same commanding presence that had led them to victory at Hastings. His determination was unshaken. To him, leadership was not about ease or comfort. It was about responsibility until the final breath. That unyielding strength made him not only a king but a legend. Through every trial and triumph, William remained steadfast in his purpose. He had faced betrayal, rebellion, and the loneliness of command. Yet his heart never turned bitter. The storms of life had forged him into iron. His empire stood as proof that discipline, patience, and faith could turn even the harshest beginnings into greatness. He had come from a world of uncertainty and carved out a legacy that time itself could not erase. Every stone in his castles, every law in his books, and every field under his rule carried the echo of his journey. A journey that began with a vision and ended with a name written in the pages of history, not merely as a conqueror, but as a builder of nations. In the final years of William's life, the world around him began to change. The once young conqueror who had crossed the sea with fire in his heart now walked slower, his armor heavier and his battles fewer. Yet inside, his mind remained sharp, his purpose unshaken. The castles he had built stood tall across England, symbols of order and power. But he knew that true strength was not in stone walls. It was in the hearts of men who believed in justice. His eyes often wandered to the horizon, and he would think about the journey that had brought him here. The stormy nights, the fierce battles, the moments when faith was all he had left. Every scar on his body carried a story, a reminder that greatness is born through struggle. As age caught up with him, William began to see the difference between victory and peace. Conquering a kingdom had been a test of courage, but maintaining it was a test of wisdom. He realized that wars may win crowns, but only fairness wins loyalty. Many rulers before him had been consumed by pride at the height of their power, but William remained grounded, remembering the days when he had nothing but hope and faith. He understood now that leadership was never about ruling people. It was about serving them, protecting them, guiding them toward stability. His kingdom, once divided by hatred, had become united through discipline and order, and he took silent pride in that transformation. He spent much of his time traveling between England and Normandy, ensuring both lands remained under his firm rule. These journeys were long and exhausting, yet he refused to rest. His sense of duty outweighed his desire for comfort. He wanted to leave his realm unshaken, his people secure, and his sons capable of ruling after him. The roads he had once marched as a warrior were now paths of governance, trade, and diplomacy. Everywhere he went, people would gather to see him, not out of fear, but respect. His presence still carried the aura of authority, but it was softened by the wisdom of age. Even in his later years, William remained vigilant against rebellion. There were always those who envied his power, who wished to test the strength of his empire. When a revolt broke out in France, William led his forces once again, though age had weakened his body. His men urged him to rest, but he would not hear of it. A king cannot rest while his realm is in danger, he said. His courage, even in old age, inspired those around him. They followed him into battle not because they feared his wrath, but because they respected his resolve. His leadership was not built on domination, it was built on conviction. In one of those campaigns, however, fate struck its final blow. During an attack on the French city of Mans, William's horse stumbled, throwing him violently to the ground. The fall injured him severely, and though he was taken back to his quarters, he knew the wound was mortal. As he lay in bed, surrounded by his loyal men and clerics, the once mighty conqueror faced the reality of mortality. His voice, once commanding armies, was now calm and steady. He did not fear death. He had faced it countless times before. But now he faced it not as a warrior, but as a man of faith, reflecting on his life's purpose. In those final days, William spoke little, but his thoughts were deep. He asked for forgiveness for the harshness of his campaigns, and prayed that his rule would be remembered not for conquest, but for order and justice. He instructed his sons to rule with fairness, reminding them that a kingdom ruled by cruelty cannot stand. He divided his lands between them, England to one, Normandy to another, hoping that peace would prevail after him. Though he knew the challenges they would face, he also knew that his blood carried the strength to overcome them. His final advice to them was simple yet eternal: rule with strength, but never without mercy. As word spread that the great king was dying, nobles, knights, and clergy came to pay their respects. Some came to mourn, others to seek favor, but all came in awe. They saw before them not just a ruler, but a man who had shaped history. The halls that once echoed with the sounds of war were now filled with silence and reverence. Even his old rivals acknowledged his greatness, for they knew that no matter what they thought of his conquests, his discipline, vision, and faith had changed the course of nations. He had proven that greatness is not born of power, but of perseverance. When William finally passed away, the world seemed to pause. The bells rang across Normandy and England, mourning the man who had once seemed invincible. His body was taken to Keene for burial, to the abbey he had built with his own will and wealth. But even in death, fate tested him. Disputes arose over where he should be laid to rest, and his burial was delayed. It was as if the world could not easily let go of the man who had reshaped it. Yet eventually, he was laid to rest, the conqueror who had crossed the sea, fought kings, and built empires, now returned to the same earth as any other man. After his death, his empire trembled, his sons quarreled, and battles resumed. But even through the chaos, the foundation he built remained unbroken. His laws, his system of governance, his castles, and his order continued to hold the realm together. The memory of his leadership became a standard by which rulers after him were judged. His legacy was not just in the land he ruled, but in the discipline he had instilled in the hearts of his people. The echoes of his rule lived on, whispering to every leader that true power is not seized. It is earned through endurance, faith, and justice. Centuries later, his name still carried weight: William the Conqueror, the man who turned storms into stepping stones and chaos into civilization. His story became a reminder that destiny favors those who do not surrender, that leadership is a lifelong battle fought, not only on fields of war, but within one's own heart. His journey began with ambition, but ended with wisdom. The empire he built was not merely of land, but of legacy, a legacy that would teach generations that faith, courage, and discipline are the pillars upon which all greatness stands. In the years that followed William's passing, his empire entered a new and uncertain chapter. The vast realm he had united through conquest and order now rested in the hands of his sons, each ambitious, each determined to prove himself worthy of his father's name. Yet, as history often shows, unity forged by one great leader can easily fracture when divided among many. The empire William built had been strong under his single, disciplined vision, but without his guiding hand, cracks began to appear. His sons admired his legacy, but they struggled to uphold the same balance of strength and justice that had defined their father's rule. The peace he had fought so hard to secure was fragile, like glass in the hands of men who did not yet understand its worth. William had divided his territories between his sons. Robert received Normandy, while William Rufus took England. What had been meant as a gesture of fairness became the seed of rivalry. Both believed they deserved more. Both sought to carry their father's mantle. Yet neither possessed the wisdom that came from years of war and sacrifice. The unity that had once been held by one sword now became two, and those blades were turned not toward foreign enemies, but toward one another. The realm that had trembled before William's power now trembled again, not from invasion, but from internal division. England under William Rufus became a place of ambition and restlessness. He ruled with strength, but lacked his father's compassion. His focus was on maintaining authority, not nurturing peace. Though he expanded the royal power and strengthened the crown, his rule was marked by tension between the monarchy and the church. The people who had once looked to William the Conqueror as a protector now looked to the heavens for stability. Yet even in his flaws, William Rufus carried fragments of his father's fire, an unyielding belief in destiny and an unwillingness to bow to fear. He was his father's son, but not his equal. Meanwhile, in Normandy, Robert, known as Robert Curthose, faced his own trials. He had long struggled under the shadow of his father's greatness. Brave but reckless, kind but inconsistent, he lacked the discipline that had made William's rule unshakable. His court was filled with noblemen who tested his authority, and his lands grew restless under weak governance. While his father had ruled with iron resolve, Robert's rule wavered between leniency and indecision. The very order William had spent his life enforcing began to loosen. The lessons of leadership that his father had tried to teach him seemed lost amidst comfort and pride. As the years passed, England and Normandy drifted apart, their bond weakened by jealousy and ambition. The once united Norman Empire was now a tale of two brothers locked in silent competition. The nobles took sides, the people grew weary, and the legacy of the conqueror began to fade beneath the noise of disputes. Yet, even through this turmoil, one truth remained clear. William's vision of discipline, justice, and faith had set a foundation that no quarrel could completely erase. The system he created continued to hold, like the roots of an ancient tree that remained strong, even as its branches swayed in the storm. The younger generation of rulers learned the hard way that greatness could not be inherited. It had to be earned. They began to realize that the crown was not just a symbol of power, but a burden of responsibility. Many of them looked back at their father's rule with new eyes. They saw how he had led armies, built laws, and earned loyalty through both strength and mercy. His name became more than a memory, it became a standard. Whenever the realm slipped into chaos, his example was invoked. What would William have done? That question echoed through generations, guiding kings who came after him. Eventually, the sons of William passed, as all rulers do, but his influence remained. England evolved, Normandy faced its own fate, and the seeds of his empire gave rise to a new identity, one that would shape the course of European history. The structure of governance he introduced, the systems of landholding, taxation, and law, became the framework upon which the English kingdom was built. Though his descendants often fought among themselves, they were all bound by the legacy of the man who had united them through vision and faith. In time, historians and chroniclers began to record his story, not just as a tale of conquest, but as a lesson in leadership. They wrote of how a man from Normandy, driven by destiny and belief, had crossed the sea and changed the course of history. They saw his flaws and his virtues, his triumphs and his regrets, and through them, they painted the portrait of a ruler who was both feared and respected. William became not just a king of his age, but a symbol of transformation, the bridge between the old world and the new. Even centuries later, his influence echoed through the kingdoms of Europe. The Norman bloodline spread through royal families. His castles stood unshaken, and his reforms became the foundation of modern governance. The English language itself carried traces of his conquest. blending Norman and Saxon words into a new identity that reflected unity through diversity. His empire may have fractured after his death, but his impact endured far beyond his lifetime. The man who had once been known simply as William of Normandy became a legend, William the Conqueror, the man who shaped nations. In the end, his story teaches us that true legacy is not measured by how long one lives or how vast one's kingdom is. It is measured by how deeply one's actions shape the future. William's empire did not survive unchanged, but the principles he lived by, courage, discipline, and faith, became immortal. His sons inherited his land, but the world inherited his lessons, and so, through time, his spirit remained. A reminder that even when empires fall, greatness built on purpose never dies. Centuries after William's conquest, his name continued to live in the chronicles of kings, in the walls of castles, and in the whispers of the English soil that had once trembled beneath his march. His legacy was no longer bound to the sword or the crown. It had transformed into something far greater, a testament to perseverance, leadership, and destiny fulfilled through conviction. The people who spoke of him no longer remembered the man as flesh and blood, but as a symbol of strength and transformation. The Norman influence he brought to England had reshaped its identity, its governance, its language, and its culture. The empire he built through war had, through time, become an empire of legacy, one that lived in the minds and morals of generations that followed. His castles still stood as monuments of purpose, the Tower of London, Windsor, and Dover, not just as fortresses of stone, but as statements of vision. Each wall and gate whispered stories of order, resilience, and foresight. These structures were more than military defenses. They were symbols of stability in a world once torn by chaos. When later rulers walked through those halls, they walked through William's shadow, reminded of how greatness demands both vision and sacrifice. Every stone laid under his command became a reminder that power without wisdom is fleeting, but power grounded in principle endures beyond time. The laws William established continued to guide England's justice for centuries. His system of governance had brought structure where there had been confusion. He introduced accountability where there had been abuse. Even those who criticized his conquests could not deny the order he left behind. In a time when kingdoms rose and fell like tides, his reforms stood as an anchor. They became the basis for later monarchs to refine and expand, forming the roots of what would eventually become one of the most stable and influential systems in the world. His desire for order had not been about control alone. It was about responsibility, about ensuring that his people lived under fairness and discipline. Generations of kings who followed often looked to his reign as a benchmark. Some tried to emulate his strength, others sought to surpass it. Yet few could match the balance he maintained between fear and respect. William understood that a ruler must be firm yet just, feared yet trusted, ambitious yet grounded. His leadership style became a study for those who sought to rule not merely through might, but through principle. Even when the empire evolved into something far different from what he had envisioned, the foundation remained rooted in his methods and his unwavering belief in structure and destiny. The English identity itself began to carry his mark. The blending of Norman and Anglo-Saxon traditions birthed a new culture, one that valued both courage and discipline, innovation and tradition. The language evolved, the architecture transformed, and the systems of government matured, all tracing back to the day William set foot on English soil. The empire that had once been born of conquest had become an empire of culture and learning. His story had transitioned from a tale of war to a legacy of transformation. In every generation, there were those who looked back at William's journey not as a tale of domination, but as a symbol of persistence. He had faced overwhelming odds, navigated betrayal, and endured hardships that would have broken lesser men. His rise was not accidental. It was the result of faith, endurance, and discipline. He had believed that his mission was guided by purpose, and that belief became the engine that drove his entire life. Long after his crown had turned to dust, that faith remained the most powerful part of his story. The historians of later centuries debated his character. Some called him a conqueror, others a reformer. Yet regardless of perspective, all agreed that he changed history. He turned division into unity, uncertainty into order, and ambition into destiny. Few men in history have shaped an entire nation's direction so completely. Even those who opposed him in his lifetime had to admit that the world was never the same after him. His name became synonymous with determination and transformation. His story was retold not only in royal courts but also in homes, classrooms, and fields. He became a figure of reflection, an example that reminded people that greatness is born through struggle. The young were taught that William's journey was not about conquest alone, but about vision, resilience, and the courage to rise when odds were impossible. He had not merely built a throne, he had built a path for others to follow. His legacy became a light that guided leaders, scholars, and ordinary people toward discipline and purpose. The spiritual lesson of his life was clear to all who reflected deeply. That victory comes not merely through might, but through conviction and steadfastness in one's principles. He had not relied solely on armies or strategies. He had relied on his will. Every success he achieved began first in his belief. The belief that he was meant to bring order to chaos, and that no storm could defeat a heart anchored in purpose. His story became a timeless reminder that power fades, but truth and effort remain eternal. And so, as time carried his memory into the modern age, William's legacy became more than history. It became a reflection of human potential. The Norman king who had crossed the sea and faced countless battles became a symbol of how far conviction can carry a person who refuses to yield. His empire no longer existed on maps, but it lived within minds, in systems of justice, in the spirit of leadership, and in the unshakable truth that true greatness is not inherited, but earned through faith, discipline, and unrelenting will. And when the dust of centuries settled, his empire may have changed, his castles may have weathered storms, but his legacy remained unbroken, unforgotten. William's story reminds us that true victory isn't found in crowns or conquests. It's found in mastering the self, in leading with vision, and in never bowing to defeat. Empires rise and fall, but the spirit of discipline, courage, and faith stands eternal. Heroes never truly die, their lessons live forever, echoing through time, calling to every soul who dares to build their own destiny with unshakable will and a fearless heart.